Stanford University.
Welcome. Welcome to the 2020 Contemplation by Design Summit. My name is Dr. Tia Ridge, and I direct the Contemplation by Design program. Our teacher today is Jonah Willihnganz. Today, he will be helping us to find true ground in hard times through love stories. Jonah Willihnganz, MFA, PhD, is the Bruce Braden Lecturer of Narrative Studies and Director of the Stanford Storytelling Project, an arts program that explores how storycraft and practices support personal and social change. He studies how stories and storytelling can deepen natural human capacities such as awareness, courage, empathy, and teaches courses in creative writing, literature, and critical theory. He is also a co-founder of the LifeWorks, a program in the School of Medicine devoted to experiential whole student education. We wholeheartedly welcome Jonah to share his wisdom and insights with us today. Thank you, Jonah. We'll begin our program now.
Thank you, Tia. And hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm really grateful to have this time with you today, to take an hour to talk about something that has been on my mind and that I've been teaching about lately, kind of to my surprise, which is love. If you had asked me 10 and especially 20 years ago, I would never have imagined, but it gives me great joy to do so. I want to thank Tia in particular because this program that she has created over the years gives us a context to talk about love, the practice of extending and receiving it that begins with our innermost processes, our habits of mind, the pictures we have in our head, what we've inherited. And as so many speakers in this series have already pointed out in this last week, this is where true healing begins, in our own minds. When we talk about creating the beloved community, we're talking about healing perception and making each of us whole. As Angel Kyoto Williams said last week, that the way to create healing is not coming to others with correction or ideas about how others should change, but instead to prepare for our own change and then listen wholeheartedly to one another. And so what I want to do is start just with the program's invitation to pause and ask us all just to sit for a moment. This is not any formal practice, but I would ask you to put both feet flat on the ground. And your intention here is really just to relax. I invite you to close your eyes if you like. And we're just going to pause. One of my favorite teachers, the Zen priest at the San Francisco Zen Center, Paul Haller, says when we slow down, it's to experience the experience we're experiencing. And so I would add to relaxing, I would add, let your breath slow down, let your whole body fall to gravity, and feel your whole body, even if it's just for these few moments, fully resting. Feel anywhere in your body that's holding tension, your shoulders, your neck, your joints, your hips, your hands. Just invite that to relax. And as you feel supported, where you are, sitting in a chair, lying in bed, or standing, or if you're on the treadmill, even if you're on the treadmill. Ask to become aware of what is supporting you. What are the circumstances, the people that have supported you in this moment? What has it taken? What labor, what resources has it taken to create this present moment of us joining together today? I think of my family, my teachers. I think of my role in the university, my colleagues, especially my wife, Kristen. And I think about just the physical world that is supporting me. And through your feet, just ask to feel the ground, through the floor, the land that you're on. I'm on Stanford campus, and so I'm on land that has been stewarded by the Ohlone for a long time, cared for by many people. We might take one deep breath and just give gratitude to all of what has allowed us to come together and be right here now in this moment with one another. And whenever you're ready, just open your eyes. The title of the talk is Finding True Ground in Hard Times Through Love Stories. And so I want to start with how there are many ways to find true ground. And even in just a short pause like that, we find in just a practice of awareness and in a practice of gratitude a way to find our ground. And another way is by experiencing love, by extending it, by truly receiving it, which isn't always as easy as it seems, because extending love and receiving love puts us into contact with what makes us feel whole. And sharing love, we recognize it is in us and available to us, and it grows when we do so. Of course, if we're in trauma and if we're in profound grief and fear, it's often difficult to, if not impossible, to extend love, and probably inappropriate to even try. But it's surprising, even when we feel that we are challenged, or that the world is a big, frightening place with lots of things going wrong, that even in those circumstances, we can connect to extending and truly receiving love. And one of the ways that we connect to that is by encountering and experiencing love stories. So one of the things that I've noticed over the last several years is, especially when we're in hard times, how often we'll reach for love stories. And I'm thinking of romantic comedies, of course, and I'm thinking of romances, but I'm also thinking of buddy movies and any kind of movie where we feel that there's a significant act of love that is occurring, that is at its core. Any novel, play, poem, where there is a significant extension of love. And we reach for those to remain in contact with that. As the psychologist Erich Fromm said, we live in a culture that does not support or circulate authentic images of exchanging love very much. Most of what we traffic in is not what we would maybe think of as authentic love. So what I want to do today is I want to offer you some story practices, which include mainly how we can approach and listen and read and experience stories that allows us to make the most of them, to let love stories do their most profound work on us. And I'm going to offer two practices. And these practices are things that we can adopt in our daily lives because we're just really adding a few ingredients to things that we already do. Rather than introduce like a new activity, I'm going to just, in a sense, offer you a couple of lenses. So when you're reading a story or listening to a story or watching a story, you're going to just take a new orientation into that. I've learned over the years that it's a lot easier to add something simple to stuff that I already do than it is to create a new habit, especially as I get older. You may be able to identify with that. So I'm going to show you two ways of having love stories do more work for us through some simple prompts that can activate us and skill us and, in a sense, grow the love impulse. I want to demonstrate mainly that we can encounter love stories in ways that give them more lasting and healing power. So we're going to look at a couple of parables. We're going to look at a couple of poems and a romantic comedy that oddly has been being mentioned constantly lately. Lamarad Owens in his talk on Friday mentioned it, and it was actually even mentioned on Saturday Night Live's Weekend Edition this week. Our stories are going to take us to India, the Middle East, the British Isles, then to Pennsylvania, hint, and then to New Mexico at the very end. So what I'd like to do is just share that I want you to think just for a moment in your mind, what kinds of stories do you think about when you think of love stories? Let a few just float to the top. And then I want you to ask yourself and take a moment to think about this. What do those stories do for you? What do you go to them for? So if we were in a small group, we would share and talk about this, but since there are more than 100 of us, I'm going to wager a bet here and say that chances are that many of you thought of romantic love stories, whether they're contemporary, whether they're films or novels. And probably many of you also said that you went to those stories to feel comfort or reassurance or hope. I think many of us do go to love stories because we feel that they are a reminder of love in the world. I think one of the main reasons that the marriage plot is so popular too is that we want to feel the success of joining. And one of the beautiful things about this is that if we begin to look at love stories, particularly typical romantic love stories, as stories that teach us about compassion, not just about what it takes to get the girl or what it takes to get the guy, but what it takes for any of us to open to love, what it takes for us to let go of distortions in the mind. So my point of view here the thing that I would like you to sort of hold in your mind as we talk about these stories is that love stories are dramatizing an exchange. And the metaphor I want to introduce here is the eyes of grievance and the eyes of compassion. And that love stories, whether they're traditional romantic love stories or whether they're what I would say teaching stories or just great stories in general, all feature this. They feature a character who comes into the story with the eyes of grievance and who ends up adopting the eyes of compassion. The reason this happens so obviously and so powerfully in romantic love stories is that in romances, the hero is always highly motivated because there's an object of love. There's something very clear that the character wants. But this exchange of the eyes of grievance for the eyes of compassion actually happens in lots of stories. And the reason that's important is because the dramatization of this exchange shows us a profound process for healing the mind. And I'm going to define these in just a second. But the last step of that is that healing the mind, as we were just saying, is what provides the true ground that we need to meet the kinds of upheavals and suffering that are so evident, so immediate, often for us. It's not the only way, but it's a powerful way. So, the eyes of grievance are the ego's eyes. They're the eyes of passing judgment. They're critical of others in the world. They're the eyes of us versus them. They're the eyes of tribalism. They're the eyes of objectification. They see scarcity and competition and vengeance, unworthiness and weakness. We turn them on ourselves. And in fact, as many of you know, the more critical we are of others in the world, the more critical we tend to be of ourselves. The eyes of grievance demand that the world be different, and they're ashamed of not being different. That's when they turn inside. And they see everything as existing in separation. They despair and they attempt to find comfort in attack, even an attack on oneself. And we choose these eyes of grievance because we feel that they'll protect us. And often we're taught that they'll protect us. They'll keep us from getting hurt, that they'll keep us from a dangerous world. And often the eyes of judgment are persuading us that they are giving us the true hard-nosed view of the world and that they will keep us from the worst of the worst. Of course, what winds up happening is they help producing in our mind a world of threat. Not that there isn't threat out there, but we start to look for it. We seek it. We're watching for it. And our perceptual system becomes distorted. The eyes of compassion are the eyes of curiosity and acceptance and forgiveness. They see without judgment, without criticality, and most importantly, they attempt to see without the baggage, without the concepts and beliefs that we inherit. In this sense, they're a little bit like seeing with beginner's mind, which is a familiar concept in Buddhism, where we have a mind that is trying to see clearly, tries to see subjects, not objects. Or in the Christian tradition, we would say to see only brothers, not enemies. They see love or calls to love, whether out in the world or inside of us. And they see just one mind. And what they perceive is a world of love. It's not without suffering, but in it, it's permeated with love. So what love stories do is they almost always begin with characters that are in the eyes of grievance, and they carry us through a process of change that character goes through where they adopt the eyes of compassion. They take a step forward in healing their own mind. And one of the most remarkable things that stories often dramatize is that in the consciousness of the story, when the couple or when the character does that healing, heals the mind by trading the eyes of grievance for the eyes of compassion, the whole community heals. We see this all the time in myth, all the time in fairy tales, all the time in stories that are surround ritual, that when there is a healing of the mind, it permeates and extends outward. When the king in the fairy tale learns the lesson that he needs to learn, when the princess in the fairy tale makes the move, the primal, visceral move she needs to make to awaken, to see clearly, to have the eyes of compassion, the whole of the kingdom changes. So there's not only often like a beautiful wedding and joy, but the land is restored, for example. This happens all the time. So love stories dramatize not only a process of healing our own mind, but what the effects of that healing can be. So what I want to do is I want to start with very briefly 2 quick tales, which we might not normally think of as love stories. And so what I want to do is use this to introduce the first practice. And you're going to take a few minutes and write in a few minutes about this. The first story practice here is that you can see every story you love as a love story. Chances are, if you love a story, it has a deep shift toward compassion, an exchange of the eyes of grievance for the eyes of compassion. So we're going to just start in India with a very famous teaching tale of the Buddha. Many of you may know it. It's called the mustard seed. There's also a mustard seed story in the Christian tradition, of course. Very different story, but also fantastic. The story is very simply, and I'm going to summarize it, given our time. A woman bears a child who she adores, and more dearly than life itself is often the phrase that's used in the translations. And one day the child becomes ill and then dies. She is bereft, desperate, and she goes to all the healers in the village, all the healers in the area. No one can do anything for her. And finally she arrives at a wise man, often the Buddha himself, and asks if he can heal the child. And he says, yes, I can, but in order to bring the child back to life, she needs to acquire an ingredient that's very difficult to find. And she asks what it is, and he says it's a mustard seed. And at first she's like, oh, well, that's not so hard. But then he adds, a mustard seed from a house that has not known death. So of course, this is a much harder ask. So what she does is she begins asking around for going house to house. And of course, what she finds is she cannot find a house. In all the houses that she visits, in all the people she gets to know, in all the stories she hears, there isn't a house that has a mustard seed that has not known death. And over time, she begins to realize that there's nothing that she can do. There is no escape from the death. And that all of the grief in her has to come forward and be experienced. She can't control the world. She can't argue the world. She can't have a grievance with the world. She has to let it go. And to me, what is so profound in this story is that the teacher is extending a profound love. Instead of comforting the woman, instead of saying, boy, this is really hard, instead of baking her cookies, he gives her the lesson that will heal her mind. And that is the love. And so even in a story like this, we can read, which is definitely a parable about loss and grief and even the nature of reality as we perceive it. It's also a love story. It shows a process for shifting from grievance to compassion. She actually creates a community by getting the stories of everyone else. She enters to community, a community that knows death. And that's how she's restored. So now we're going to zip over to the Middle East. It's another story most of you will know. And you'll probably recognize it as soon as I start to read it. This one I'm going to read. It's very brief. And again, this is not conventionally understood as a love story. But I'm going to make the case that if we look at this story, which I love, as a love story, that it can teach us about the exchange of the eyes of grievance for the eyes of compassion. A lawyer stood up to test Jesus, and he said, "Rabbi, what must I do to live, to be in eternal life?" And Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law of the Torah? How do you read it?" And the man answered and said, "You will love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and you will love your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus said to him, "You answered right. Do this, and you will live." But wishing to justify himself, he said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" And Jesus answered, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hand of robbers. They stripped him and beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. By chance, a priest went down the same road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And a Levite also came by and saw him and passed on the other side. But a Samaritan on his journey came near, and when he saw him, he pitied him. He went to him and bound his wounds. He poured olive oil and wine over him, set him on his own beast, and took him to an inn where he cared for him. And on the next day, he took out and gave 2 denarii to the innkeeper and said, "Take care of him, and whatever it costs you still may have. I will repay when I return." And Jesus said, "Which of the 3 seems to you the neighbor of the man who fell before the robbers?" And the lawyer said, "The one who treated him with mercy." And Jesus said, "Go, and you too do the same." So this was a favorite parable of Martin Luther King, and he taught very powerfully about it. And one of the things that he emphasized is that in this parable, we actually have probably 3 reactions, 3 characters that we can all identify with. We have the robbers, we have the priest and the Levite, and we have the Samaritan. And the way that King would sometimes sum this up is they each have a worldview. And the worldview is, for the robbers, thine is mine. And for the Levite and the priest, mine is mine. And for the Samaritan, mine is thine. So the robbers felt like the way this world works, you got to get yours, and if you're vulnerable, I'm going to take it. Things are so scarce, survival of the fittest, etc., etc. The Levite and the priest, mine is mine. Here, the orientation is, we all have our lot, but it's too dangerous to extend. It's too extravagant to extend. And we best keep to ourselves, look to ourselves, our own people, our own families, and that's it. And for the Good Samaritan, mine is thine. This is the risky, inconvenient, dangerous, and extravagant altruism that King taught us in the parable. And what I want to add to this is if we read it as a love story, we might return to the very beginning, where we can remember that the question is, how do I live in eternal life? In other words, how do I live with what is eternal, in contact with the eternal? This is not, as sometimes we can perceive this, he's not asking, what behavior do I need to do in order to get the reward? What is the moral code I need to follow in order to get rewarded and go to heaven? Which there is that flavor of it, particularly in the Old Testament. We have this kind of transactional spirit, this like, I'll do this, then I get this. But what Jesus is doing constantly in the New Testament is saying, the kingdom is here, eternal life is here. So when you ask the question, what do I do for eternal life? I'm saying, this is what you do to be in eternal life right now. And the eternal is love. And so what he answers is, with this parable, not here's how you should behave for the world. Here's how you should behave for a just society. It is that. But more primally, and the reason that this is a love story, is he's saying, if you want to heal your mind and to live in love, you need to extend love. Everyone is your brother. You need to live to the capacity you have to extend always. Then you will be in heaven. So with these two parables, we're seeing how we can look at any story you love as a love story. And when we look at it as a love story, when we see where is the extension of love, we can learn what is required of us to be in that. And I want you to take 5 minutes and do some writing to these prompts. So the first one is, where in your life can you forgive yourself for being the robber? The second prompt is, where in your life do you feel like you can extend love like the Good Samaritan? And to kind of follow either one of these prompts, you can ask yourself, what true ground could this give you? Okay, I'm going to call you back. You can just wrap up what you're writing. You can continue to write a little bit as I just dive in. You're going to see on the slide right now the second practice, which is seeing romantic love stories as compassion stories. So most of the time when we encounter a love story, whether it's a romance novel, a romantic comedy film, a myth, fairy tale, just about anything, we tend to think of it as being largely about how we get a companion. And our enjoyment of it is often like, what are all the bad things and terrible, what are all the obstacles that are keeping the lovers apart, and how are they going to overcome them? And sometimes that's all it is, but much of the time, in the best love stories, there is, as I've said, a profound lesson that is tied to compassionate love. And so, for example, many of you may know of the tradition of the Beauty and the Beast stories, which are sort of, late fairy tales that started in the 18th century. They draw on older sources. Or the Loathsome Lady stories, including the Lady Ragnall story, or what we have one version of it that's handed down in Chaucer's Wife of Bath, which is the story of, depending on the version, essentially a knight who who's done something often really bad, who is then tasked with discovering what women want. And the price to pay if he doesn't figure it out is that he must give a wish to this always hideous hag. In the same way that in Beauty and the Beast, the groom is hideous. So these are the ugly lover stories, and they are across cultures, across time, very, very common stories. And in the Lady Ragnall story, in the end, what ends up having to happen is the main character needs to see the other and give the other sovereignty, not based on what they look like, not based on their expectations, not based on anything that the logical, egoic mind assesses, judges. And in the Lady Ragnall story, the knight is Gawain, and Gawain gives over his judgment. He says he's given an option after having found a decent answer to the question. What he's offered is that the woman can be either beautiful but unfaithful, or ugly but faithful. In other versions, she can be beautiful in private with him, but ugly everywhere else, or vice versa. Sometimes it's night and day. There are lots of versions of it. And Gawain, at this moment, makes the big jump from the eyes of grievance to the eyes of compassion and says, you decide. And when he does that, the old hag, of course, becomes beautiful, and the curse is broken. So what he's done is he's seen differently. He's seen with the heart. So what I want to do is I want to just take you quickly through a very modern version of moving from the eyes of grievance to the eyes of love in a movie that many of you will know. And this is where we're going from now, the British Isles, to Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. So shout out to two of my students / friends, Emma Master and Sarah Dobbins. They asked to watch some love story movies this summer, and so this is one of the ones we watched, and I've been thinking about it ever since. So in our story, we have a main character who is a jerk, and says so himself. And he feels essentially that people are morons, the world is moronic, and he gets very upset when the weather doesn't go his way. It should do what he asks. He's a narcissist, he's a prima donna, and he gets trapped in a single day, Groundhog Day. Most of you probably know the plot. And he can't figure out how to get out. He starts reliving the same thing over and over and over. And at first, he goes into denial. He says, this can't be happening. And in fact, he lives a whole second day and just sort of thinks, okay, he's hallucinating, but it'll resolve. And then the second thing he does is, after a little while, he realizes that he can't be killed. He's always going to wake up, so he can do whatever he wants. So the next route he takes is hedonism. He just starts eating as much as he wants. And this eventually leads him into the beginning of manipulation, which is he realizes if he starts to get to know people, well, he can get them to do things that he wants. So he asks a pretty young woman about her background, and she's befuddled, but he knows that the next day he can then pretend that he knows her. And so Annie McDowell, who plays the love interest Rita in the story, is somebody who he's kind of had an eye on and admires, but also denigrates as being a kind of a rube, as someone who is so open-hearted and so kind that she's naive and doesn't get the way the world works. And but he wants to seduce her. So he tries, and he tries a lot, and it doesn't go well, because the lover can tell when something is inauthentic. And for all the manipulation that he tries day after day after day after day, and we get a sense that it goes on for weeks and weeks, nothing works. And so he then goes into depression, and he tries killing himself. He tries everything he can to check out. And after he's sort of exhausted that option, he switches. And what he does is he goes to a diner in the morning with Rita, and he says to her, I'm going to tell you something that seems incredible, and he explains it, and he knows how to explain it at this point in a way that she'll start to give it some credence. And in the first time we really see him break open, he says, I want you to believe in me. I've always found this line interesting. It's not that he wants her to believe him, but to believe in him. And from that point forward, she becomes very open and decides to give him a chance to follow him around. And he gives up on his designs for her, but instead just asks for compassion. And when he asks for compassion, the compassion in him begins to grow. So here's where we're going to sort of see how this begins. First, I want you to see how I'm going to stop the share for just a second and make sure I have the sound on for you. This is how it typically goes for him after he's not only does the extension of love that he's witnessed in Rita become a model for him, that once he begins to follow that, he starts to open up and experience what gives him joy and go into that joy. So not only does he become kinder, not only does he change his orientation to the world that he's had a grievance with, but he's then become open to the joy of the world, which at the beginning of the movie, there was nothing. There was no openness to that. And so part of what that demonstrates is a healing of the mind. And so what the romantic comedy story does is illustrate that the love that he finds is for the world. It's for everything around him. So he begins to extend, he gets to know practically the whole town, and he becomes joyous. The romance with Rita becomes secondary, and in fact, she begins to be very drawn to him because she can feel his orientation to the world changing. And we begin to see, even in scenes that where there was trouble or difficulty, the effect of this healing of his mind begins to spread to a young couple that's getting cold feet about their marriage, to a boy who's falling out of a tree, to people having car trouble, to so just as in the myths, what begins to happen is as he begins to exercise compassionate love, what we might call agape, the world around him begins to change. As he exchanges the eyes of grievance for the eyes of love, his mind is healed, and everything around him heals. So I encourage you to all watch the film. It's a beautiful film for the lessons it gives. But not only that, to use this as a model. And here's our second practice. So for the last few minutes here, I'd like you to write. And then if you can stay for 5 extra minutes, I have a treat for you, which is a beautiful 5-minute story read by one of my favorite poets, Naomi Shihab Nye. But I want you to take maybe 3 minutes just to write to this prompt. And again, you don't have to write to all of them. You can choose what feels resonant with you. Where are you meeting the world with judgment in a way that you know isn't serving you? Here, Phil, Bill Murray's character, he knows, and you saw in that exchange with Rita, that being a jerk, being critical, being on the attack of others and himself isn't serving him. How might you try bringing the eyes of compassion to that situation? So if you've been able to identify something specific, imagine what would bringing the eyes of compassion take? How would you do it? And then finally, you might imagine what you might see. So just a few minutes. We're at time, but I'm just going to close with a short poem. It's a recording that was made 1.5 years ago when Naomi Shihab Nye, the poet, was here visiting Stanford and working with some of our students. And again, it's not a love poem per se, but we can think about here in the beginning, we have an older woman in distress who is outside of her own language, and the inciting incident is that there's a PA message read over an airport system asking for someone, if there's anyone who speaks Arabic, to come to a certain gate. So some of you may already know this poem. It's called Gate A4. And so the world of the poem in the beginning is this woman is a problem. This is a challenge. How do we deal? As you'll see, she's in a lot of distress. And then we see the actions taken, and then we witness, as in all the great stories, what the effect of compassion is. So I want to thank you. I'll just close with this. I'll come back at the end, but if you can hang in there just to hear this last poem, I encourage you to.
I thought about lighting a candle in Gate A4 recently when I passed through the Albuquerque airport, but then I knew I would be arrested, so I didn't. But I could, because it is a sacred space to me now. And to all the places in our lives and all the stories that unfold in them, which create sacred space. And it could be anywhere, your new campus, that wonderful Windover place, building we were in, the most beautiful building I've ever been in on this campus yesterday. Such a building, and your own room. Gate A4. Wandering around the Albuquerque airport terminal, after learning my flight had been delayed 4 hours, I heard an announcement. If anyone in the vicinity of Gate A4 understands any Arabic, please come to the gate immediately. Well, one pauses these days. Gate A4 was my own gate. I went there. An older woman in full traditional Palestinian embroidered dress, just like my Sitti wore, was crumpled to the floor, wailing. "Help," said the flight agent. "Talk to her. What is your problem? We told her the flight was going to be late, and she did this. I stooped to put my arm around the woman and spoke haltingly. Shu dawa, shu biddek habibti, stand this way, min fadlik, shu bitsawi. The minute she heard any words she knew, however poorly used, she stopped crying. She thought the flight had been canceled entirely. She needed to be in El Paso for major medical treatment the next day. I said, no, we're fine. You'll get there. Just late. Who's picking you up? Let's call him. We called her son. I spoke with him in English. I told him I would stay with his mother till we got on the plane. Then we called her other sons, just for the fun of it. Then we called my dad, and he and she spoke for a while in Arabic and discovered, of course, they had 10 shared friends. Then I thought, just for the heck of it, why not call some Palestinian poets I know and let them chat with her? This took up 2 hours. She was laughing a lot by then, telling of her life, patting my knee, answering questions. She had pulled a sack of homemade mamul cookies, little powdered sugar crumbly mounds stuffed with dates and nuts, from her bag, and was offering them to all the women at the gate. To my amazement, not a single woman declined one. It was like a sacrament. The traveler from Argentina, the mom from California, the lovely woman from Laredo, we were all covered with the same powdered sugar and smiling. There is no better cookie. And then the airline broke out free apple juice, and 2 little girls from our flight ran around serving it, and they were covered with powdered sugar too. And I noticed my new best friend, by now we were holding hands, had a potted plant poking out of her bag, some medicinal thing with green furry leaves. Such an old country traveling tradition. Always carry a plant. Always stay rooted to somewhere. And I looked around that gate of late and weary ones and thought, this is the world I want to live in. The shared world. Not a single person in that gate, once the crying of confusion stopped, seemed apprehensive about any other person. They took the cookies. I wanted to hug all those other women too. This can still happen anywhere. Not everything is lost. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for coming.
And thank you all. I am very grateful to have had this opportunity. That last line, they took the cookies. All of the people afraid of the Arabs, afraid of extending, afraid of participating in the beloved community, all extended, beginning with that act of compassion, of seeing the act of love, the extension of love in play. So I wish for all of us capacity to extend love wherever we go, to give up our eyes of grievance, to exchange them for the eyes of compassion. And I encourage you to use these 2 practices to look for how that extension of love is present in stories that you're already encountering, whether it's in a profound parable or whether it's in a romantic comedy. So thank you all, and especially thank you to Tia. I wish you all well. I'll put on a last slide here and share with you, which is just if you would like to find out more about the LifeWorks program that I'm involved in, the Stanford Storytelling Project that I direct, and a new program called Meeting the Moment, which is co-sponsored by LifeWorks, the Storytelling Project, and led by the Office of Religious and Spiritual Life. These links are there for you. One person asked the question, where could there be more titles of movies that you might look to? And the Meeting the Moment website will slowly over the year be populated with those kinds of films, thanks to the fellows and students taking one of the courses. And so that would be one place I would look. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jonah, for grounding us in love. Thank you for your gift. Peace be with you.